we took a really close look at what called the Al-Muhaddathun, the Al-Mohads, and their what they did in Spain and what they did in North Africa, and what was so telling about the circumstances that in terms of that, the Almohads began as they were all Berber. They become a mixture of Berber and Moors. And we re-emphasize the point that Moors are two ethnicities as such, even though the name that was given to them by Europeans didn't recognize this fact. In terms of ethnicity, the Moors were a combination of Berber, African, and then Arab as such. Okay, so today we're going to do a little bit of, there's no questions, a little bit of looking at the beginning of the spread of Islam into sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, so we're not looking at so much at North Africa now. We're going to begin to look at this circumstances. How does Islam spread into what is considered sub-Saharan Africa? Okay, what were the processes that took place? Was it military conquest in terms of political systems changing and coming under the rule of, the political rule of Islam, like what happened in with Greater Syria or with Persia? They become part of the Muslim Ummah as such, and then over a course of many years, Islam spreads amongst the people, and that, or is it something else? So I know this is going to seem that it's very unfair, but can somebody put your thinking caps on and give me a time frame of when you think, or a circumstance that happened, that Islam entered into Africa?
Let me see.
And don't make it more complicated than the question is. Okay, just give a thought to it. I would give you some hints, but I knew you all are smart enough to pick up on this one.
What's the question?
Okay, the question is, to repeat it, is, and looking at the beginning, we're looking at the beginning of the spread of Africa into sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, what was the event that we could look at that gives us the first instance of, quote unquote, Islam spreading into what's considered sub-Saharan Africa?
Was it the Hijrah?
Which Hijrah?
The first one.
Oh, the first one. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was
okay.
Yeah.
I said that because we know there's two.
To Abyssinia, right?
Okay. So we're going to take a look at that. Okay. And that's right. Okay. So many historians consider Africa to be the first continent that Islam spreads in. They say from Southeast Asia onto and into the African continent, going sub-Saharan. All right. But as Sister Zakiya said, the first instance of Muslims going into Africa is the first Hijrah. What was the first Hijrah? Somebody tell me. What was it about? Why did it happen? What was the impetus, that ended up with these Muslims going to, going into where they went?
Being attacked, and the Prophet asked for refuge from the
Najash. Okay.
Najash.
Okay. All right. So, Talia just said that these individuals were under tremendous persecution in Mecca. Okay. And the Prophet ﷺ told them to issue orders for them to migrate. And he told them to go to Abyssinia. What we're going to look at is exactly where they went in Abyssinia. Okay. And what happens while they're there? Okay. So if we look at a present-day map of Africa, and I've found one that's 2 maps I want to send to you, or figure out from Sister Zakiya how to send them, that shows you the different areas of Africa where Islam came into, but more importantly, it shows you the trade routes that were established in Africa. And these trade routes become extremely important, okay, extremely important. All right, so the first Hijrah, make note of this because it's important. When we hear about them going to Abyssinia, we don't often hear about what other areas they passed through to get to Abyssinia. And this becomes extremely important. So, 2 countries, Djibouti and Somalia. These early Muslims who are making Hijrah to Abyssinia, they passed through what is present-day Djibouti and Somalia. And they did so without incident. No one sought to harm them or anything like this. So they passed through. And just as Talia said, the Prophet ﷺ instructed them to go to a particular kingdom under the governing of a particular ruler. So they enter into Abyssinia, go through what is present-day Ethiopia, and they end up in what is present-day Eritrea. Now, all that, Eritrea and Ethiopia don't exist as 2 separate countries at the time. It's all Abyssinia.
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Wa alaikum salam, Sheikh Radi. Kaifa hal? How are you?
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Good to have you aboard, as always. Alhamdulillah.
Glad to be aboard.
I didn't hear, I'm sorry.
Mm.
He said he didn't hear you.
What do we? No, I said I'm glad to be aboard.
Oh, okay. Alhamdulillah.
Sorry for disturbing you.
No problem, none whatsoever. We're looking at beginning to look at the discussion of Islam's spread into sub-Saharan Africa. And we're focusing on right now the first Hijrah, because this is a beginning phase to a certain extent. Okay, so nowadays Abyssinia is Eritrea and Ethiopia. The kingdom that the Prophet ﷺ sends them to is actually in Eritrea in present-day terms. It's a Christian kingdom, okay? Some pronounce it Aksum, spelled capital A-K-S-U-M, okay?
Interesting.
And this trip takes place, the migration, this first Hijrah, in Rajab, the month of Rajab, 8 BH, before Hijrah. What does that BH mean when we say before Hijrah? What is it pointing to? When does the Islamic calendar start as such? And why would this be called before Hijrah?
That's because it happened prior to the Prophet making the migration to Medina.
Excellent. That's the second, right? Okay, so it happens before what some call the second Hijrah. As Imam Radi correctly stated, this migration to what is present-day Eritrea, Aksum, happens before the Prophet ﷺ is ordered by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make the Hijrah to Medina. And so in terms of an Islamic calendar, if anything happens before that time, it's referred to as before Hijrah. If something happens after that date in moving to Medina, it's called after Hijrah, AH. Okay? So they cross the Red Sea, go through Djibouti and Somalia, and they end up in present-day Eritrea, at that time, Abyssinia. So now the question becomes, does anybody know what the number was of the individuals who made the first Hijrah? How many was it? Approximately.
Around 40. Less than that.
Does anybody have an idea?
I want to say 72, but
No, a little bit less.
okay, yeah, that must be the other one.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. 24.
23.
Okay,
Okay.
so yeah. Okay, it's coming back to me. I was close.
Talia said 24. She was close. She was one off. It was actually 23.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going back into the archives of my
Okay.
brain.
Okay. So now, what was the name of the Christian ruler? Some spell this kingdom Axum, A-X-U-M. There's two ways to spell it, but it's the same place. What was his name? Does anybody know what his first name may have been? I get silence.
No, I know it was the Negus.
Okay.
They called him the Negus.
Okay.
That was a king.
All right. Now, his first name, write it down, was Amrah. A-R-M-A-H.
Najashi was the second.
Nam, An-Najashi. Right. And you can spell that A-N, take for the Aleph Lam, and then a hyphen, capital N, A, J as in John, A, S, H, I.
Johnson.
Amrah An-Najashi. What is one of the important, besides protecting the Muslims who came, what is the other important thing we need to know about him? Did he remain Christian?
I don't believe so.
No, he
I
didn't.
think
He didn't.
he accepted Al-Islam.
Right, he accepted Islam.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's debated
Now,
whether that Najashi
well, the one that they call the Negus.
Najas was the one who actually took the Shahada. I ran across that somewhere.
No, I've seen it as well.
Mhm.
In my own mind, a preponderance of the information, quote unquote, seems to fall with An-Najashi
Mhm.
as being the one.
Mhm.
Okay. The other question: did any more Muslims go to Abyssinia, or was it just this 23?
I'm not sure, but after they found that they were safe there, I think some more went. I don't know how many.
101 to be exact.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, that's the ones that went to Abyssinia.
Okay. 101 Muslims followed. These went in
After the
788, which means it's after the Muslims get to
After
Medina.
the
Okay.
24.
24.
Well, they go before that, but once the Muslims get to Medina in 788, which is like 628 current era, 628 being 4 years before the Prophet's death, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, many of them return to Medina, but some of them don't. Some of them don't. Anybody have any idea where they may have went? The ones who remained. Did they remain in Eritrea or did they move on to somewhere else?
I don't know where they moved to. I do know that some Muslims converted to Christianity there.
That happened, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Okay, that happened, unfortunately.
They left Islam.
That happened, okay. Many of the Muslims who stayed, they go to a place called, and I'll spell it for you, capital Zeila. Okay, Zila, pronounced but spelled capital Zeila. Okay. Now, what's important about this is that this area was considered to be, I'm going to say it in Arabic and then I'll explain it in English. Imam Radi may pick up on it. They moved into an area that was called Bilad al-Berber. Bilad al-Berber. Now, two important facts about this circumstance. Bilad al-Berber translates into the land of the Berbers. Okay, the land of the Berbers. Points to the fact Berbers were not Arab because the individuals who were moving there were Arab. Okay, so these Berbers, the area that they moved into, were African. Straight out. No ifs, no ands, no buts. They were straight out African. And the Arabs referred to the area that they moved into as Bilad al-Berbers, the land of the Berbers. Okay? Any questions there? Now, once they got there, they did something very important. And the Berbers allowed them to do it. They didn't persecute them and said that they couldn't. Once these Muslims got to this area called Bilad, the land of the Berbers, they built Masjid al-Qiblatain. Anybody know before I explain it in English what that name means? Besides Imam Radi, he can't. Okay.
That faces Mecca. Oh. All right, I'm part of the class too, but
I know.
I have to be quiet. All right, I'll be quiet.
Nope. Masjid al-Qiblatain.
Masjid
Anybody
with the
have
two
an idea what that
Qiblas.
means?
Masjid with the two Qiblas.
Right, exactly. Two Qiblas. Okay. Why was it called that, Sister Zakia?
I am thinking that first when they were praying, they would pray to Jerusalem. And then when the prophet received the revelation, then they were praying towards Mecca.
Exactly. Okay. So the first, when they built the masjid, the command to the Prophet ﷺ hadn't come to change the direction of the Qibla to Mecca. They were praying towards Jerusalem, Quds. Okay. And when that message came, they changed and began, and they got word of it to pray towards Mecca. And this was, but the name for the masjid remained Masjid al-Qiblatain, the masjid of the two Qiblas. Okay.
Is it still in existence?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Okay. Now, but there's another masjid built. Okay. And it's built in a city within Eritrea. Name of the city is Massawa. Massawa. Okay. And this masjid was known as the Masjid of the Companions. Some historians report that this was the oldest masjid in Africa, period. Built in Massawa, in Eritrea, and called Masjid al-Sahaba, the Masjid of the Prophet's companions. Okay. It's the second masjid that we know of that became known as masjid, as being called not officially, but seen as Masjid al-Qiblatain, because it was built during a time before the Prophet ﷺ got the revelation to switch to, to pray towards Mecca. This masjid didn't survive in terms of the structure. Okay, The word used and when they described it was that it became defunct, but some people continue to pray in it, but it's not in existence right now. But they do have, his historical records of this having taken place in these circumstances. So we have here, if we want to look at it, an introduction of Islam into Africa. When we get the story about the first Hijrah, we don't get this information as such, other than they went there. Some of the Muslims returned after the Hijrah to Medina, but some of them didn't. And unfortunately, as Imam Radi pointed out I was going to make, some Muslims went there and were there and quote unquote apostated and embraced Christianity, in terms of that. But the other thing here that we're going to do before we begin to look at specific areas is to get some ideas about the fact that by the time of the advent of the Quran and the things that go on in the Arabian Peninsula in terms of the seerah and the prophets, history, so forth and so on, these trade routes have been well established, going in through different aspects of sub-Saharan Africa. So you find, for example, just to give you some things that we're going to look at the Horn of Africa and find out that, it's not talked about that much, but there are Arab traders who settle in the Horn of Africa, and Islam takes root, and it's been there for so long. Okay, we'll look at other areas, especially West Africa. Okay, because one of the things about the Almohads is that they sent individuals up and down, established settlements along the Senegal River. Okay, and this became a basis. You want to call them outposts or whatever. This became a basis for interaction between the people there who were Muslim and those who were not. And in the cases of these places that were established, they weren't always called, we can't assume that they were Arabs. Okay, many of them were straight out Berbers who had embraced Islam and now were there. So trade becomes an extremely important mechanism that allows for Islam to be spread into these different areas of Africa that we're going to look at. Meaning sub-Saharan Africa. So at this point, we're looking at sub-Saharan Africa. We're not looking at North Africa and Egypt anymore. We're talking about now what some people refer to as being quote unquote Black Africa. I don't like that term, as such, because it had somewhat of a derogatory meaning to it. But we're looking into the area that, if we want to say where the inhabitants that quote unquote our ancestors came from, then yeah, that's what we're going to begin to look at. There's a lot of things done in the 18th in the 19th century concerning Islam and Africa. Some of it is not pretty at all, in terms of what we're going to look at, okay? Especially when it comes to the slave trade. And there's no way to look at Islam in Africa, not look at the slave trade, okay? And one of the things we're going to deal with, that I always deal with, is I'm not trying to paint a pristine picture about Islam spread into Africa. Okay, meaning by that, Islam in and of itself as we know it is perfect because it comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No doubt about that. What Muslims do is an entirely different circumstance, as I think we can all agree to. And so to answer the question right off the bat, were there Muslims who captured other people, Africans, and sometimes other Muslims, and sold them into slavery? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's not something for us to be ashamed of. It's just a historical fact and reality that it took place. for whatever the reasons were that it took place. Okay, so many of the, not many, when we, in particular, when we look at Zanzibar, this is one of the things that we're going to see. But I'm just telling you now to get, to get, not that you don't know, but to get prepared for it, because it happened. It definitely happened. And so, and we'll see that there's so many things that in this, and it's not that Islam spreads through sub-Saharan Africa in one fell swoop, all at one time. It happens simultaneously in different areas and places at the same time, but under different dynamics. And this is what we really want to pay attention to, okay? And like I said, some of the things that we'll come across, especially dealing with the 19th century, in the latter stages of the 19th century or mid 19th century into the 20th century, we have to understand that even at this time, there's a particular way that sub-Saharan Africa is being looked at. And I saved a lecture given by an individual just a few days ago, where he talks about the need to keep sub-Saharan Africa dependent on outside forces in terms of and being subservient to them, because the world has known for the long time that the West, quote unquote, Western Europe and otherwise, viewed Africa as the place having everything that they needed to continue in terms of their own civilizations. Okay, and we see this come to fruition. And there's no way to avoid looking at these things when we look at the spread of Islam in sub-Saharan Africa. And in many instances, unfortunately, Muslims are part of the problem instead of being part of the solution. And with our history, we just can't take all of it that is good and not pay any attention to the negative things that took place. And we may not have been involved in it, we weren't, but it's ours, as well. And we need to know about it to have, competent conversations with those who would try to demean Islam about bringing up these things, and to show that, no, Islam didn't call for this to be done. Okay, if individuals were doing this outside of what the Quran and the Sunnah points to, then it was the Muslims who were making the mistakes or the errors, and not Islam as such. And so this is one of the reasons that we want to make sure we take a look at it, and to become as astute in looking at it as we possibly can, and knowing in reality what happened and the things that didn't happen that have been laid at the foot of the spread of Islam in sub-Saharan Africa. Any questions or comments? No one? Not anything? Anything that you want to add? Imam Raji?
Islam is perfect.
Absolutely.
And Muslims are human beings.
No. Yep.
So when we read this history, we're gonna see that Islam shows itself as the perfection that it is, because that is the measuring stick we use for all of these various contradictions that we seem to think are there. The thing is that, all right, what's supposed to happen in the slave's life?
Right.
What does Islam say about that?
Right.
What is supposed to happen? What are these? How are we to deal with Christians? What does Islam say about that?
Right.
So, as I said, Islam is the perfection for the human being. It's the life that the human being should be following. And anything other than that is just that, it's something other than that.
Right.
You know, we have nothing to be ashamed of.
Exactly.
You know, and the
Exactly.
black nationalists, they're not black nationalists, but the African people like Dr. Ben and the like, they harp on these kinds of things.
Right.
Weakness in Islam, but that has nothing to do with Islam.
Right. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
That's for sure. Jazakallah khair.
It was a world event
Okay.
that happened.
Can you speak up a little bit louder? So Leah said was that, is that it was a world event, the aspect of the spread of Islam, the things that happened there. And as, she said it was a world event. Things took place there that we have to pay attention to. It involved Muslims, and not all the time as aspects of those violating the Quran and the Sunnah. It involved Muslims who were striving their best to practice the Quran and the Sunnah. That the harm fell upon, and we definitely have to pay attention to that. Some gets more notoriety than others. But for example, how many of you have read or heard about the book called Things Fall Apart
By Chinua Achebe.
by Chinua Achebe?
Oh, yes, we use that in school.
Okay. Has anybody else besides Sister Farrakhan read it?
No.
No.
Okay. It takes place, he writes the book and it takes place in Nigeria. Okay. And for me, and anyone who else has read it, Talia can comment. For me, when I read the book, it was pointing to the fact that things fell apart in light of what you just said, Imam Rabi. Okay. Islam being perfect, pristine, as Allah has given it to us. And then things fell apart when the English show up and things, begin to happen in terms of their colonization. And Islam is pushed by the wayside. The main individual in the book whose world falls apart, quote unquote, was Muslim. Okay. And you see certain things like the looking at the aspect of I don't know anywhere in Islam at all where a woman being pregnant with twins was a bad omen, a bad sign. But within his tribe, a woman pregnant with twins was like, she was snake bitten, to use that phrase. Something had went wrong in her life, and she was blamed for it. Okay. The impetus on, you see the beginning stages of the encroachment of Christianity into areas. Okay. And if we want to say that Islam wasn't understood in its proper context, then you see certain things happen there. And you see where this area where Islam has been at for a long time, it begins to break apart and quote unquote fall apart, as such. And so, again, it points to the fact that when we look at sub-Saharan Africa, we have to look at it from the standpoint that Islam, as Imam Radi pointed out, has always been pristine and perfect. From its inception, it becomes, if we're thinking otherwise, not necessarily us, then we don't understand about the mercy and the grace that Allah placed upon mankind with Islam and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And so we look at this area, we have to be objective. When we look at the area where quote unquote Muslims made mistakes, we have to recognize it as such not in being, condescending or judging, but simply for us to understand, look, this is what, as you said, Imam Radi, this is what Islam said
Mm-hmm.
should be done in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
This is what actually happened. And as a result of that, this is what happened.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes a circumstance for us to learn from
Mm-hmm.
and to do that. So I'm looking at, we're going to spend some time. It's not going to be like a couple of lectures, looking at this. We're going to spend some time. We're going to take each area, look at it thoroughly, and hopefully as a unit and as a community learn from it.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of that. So
Mm-hmm.
so I'm looking forward to doing it.
Alhamdulillah.
And having everybody aboard. By any stretch of the imagination, I'm not an expert. Okay, so comments and views that you have and questions, please.
Mm-hmm.
No, I got to get it and send it to
Oh,
you. Yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Sister Zakia, I'm going to get with you. I found these maps. I saved them on my Microsoft Word, but I just need to know how I can do it to either post it on Zoom and share when we look at it, or send it to everyone.
Right. So right now you are using what to be on Zoom?
To be on Zoom, I'm using with Apple. I'm using what do you call it? I'm using it. Don't even know what it's called. Okay.
Is it an iPad or is it a MacBook?
Yeah. I got a MacBook.
Okay. So are your pictures on your MacBook?
Yes.
So go to share screen,
Mm-hmm.
and your computer is going to come up. You're going to choose that, and
Okay.
then find your pictures, and everybody they can see them.
Okay. I think what happened is not. I understand what you're talking about there, but I have actually a Microsoft Word browser, Bing. Okay. And it's saved in there. But now that you said it, I think I know what to do, and I can get it. And the next time we have it, I can put them up, and I can share it, everybody to be able to see it.
Save them to your pictures folder.
Right.
Or if they're in your Microsoft Word, you can show everything on your screen you can see. So you can still share it.
Okay,
you can share anything.
Okay, great, great. So next week we'll do that.
You have to go to your Microsoft Word. You got to remember that.
Yeah. So next week we'll do that then. Okay, because these trade routes are ultimately so important. Just not only in terms of the aspect of they become, trade becomes a viable way for Islam to be spread, okay, and that, but just the amount of wealth that's generated, through these through these trade routes and where they go. Okay, so you have traders going out of sub-Saharan Africa, going all the way to what is presently Beijing, China, and back, and stopping at places all along the way, being involved in commerce. And these are things that hardly are never talked about looking at sub-Saharan Africa. Somalia, Djibouti were, major trading outposts. And that, like I said, when we look at Zanzibar, and that, so it gives us a wealth of information, allowing us to become more aware about the world we live in and the past history of our ancestors. In terms of that, and even looking at some things, for example, I did this in one of the other classes, but so constantly, you hear, to bring up a circumstance, for example, this new movie that's out, Wonder Woman 1984, okay, and its aspect about Amazons and like this, okay. Well, 19th century Africa, English historians write about the area that they're in, and these women warriors, African women warriors, that one English commentator said, we really don't like going into this area because of the hostility, but also the efficiency of these women warriors. One actually wrote and said, if we could incorporate them into the British Army, the Army would be all that much stronger. Okay, in terms of that. So these are things that, we want to look at to debunk some myths that are out there, and be aware of what's being talked about and what's being said. Okay. So anyone else with any questions, comments, anything, suggestions?
I just had a question. Now,
Okay.
what letters did you use for the years before the Hijrah? Did you use AH for after the Hijrah?
BH.
Oh, BH. Okay.
BH. Okay. And, you raised that issue, and, which is a good question, but want to point to something else too. Can't remember exactly when, but when, in the year of our Lord, Anno Domini, and before Christ stopped being used. And the reason was, one of the reasons was, is that when they would say in the year of our Lord, they were actually settling on the fact that December 25th was the year, December, the date that Jesus was born. And then information started coming out. They're like, no, wait a minute. That's not when he was born. Okay. And you had dates for his birth being, between 3 and 5 BCE, which meant before current era. Okay, and then you had in place of Anno Domini, that CE, which meant current era. Okay, and that was one of the things that got to the point of stopping that use of BC, which meant before Christ. Okay, and AD in the year of our Lord after his birth, supposedly with the Catholic Church controlling most educational systems, being on December 25th. Okay. But for us as Muslims, BH before Hijrah, before the move to Medina. The move to Medina establishes the Islamic State, the Ummah, and thus the beginning of the Islamic calendar, quote unquote, AH. Okay. Anything else? Sister Miriam, you have any questions?
No.
Is everything clear?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Fantastic. Okay.
I'd like to make a comment.
Please.
I noticed that when they talk about historical events controlling the Muslims, when it's negative, they let you know that it's Muslims.
Oh, yes.
Never use the word Christian.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
I had this conversation with a sister of mine, and I said, the Christians always talk about they don't like us because we don't worship Jesus. Mm-hmm. But the Jews don't even think that he was real.
Right.
and you kiss their feet.
Yeah.
You even collaborate with them on taking care of the Jews.
Right.
Depending on the Christians. Yeah. So it's a lot. And if the history is not taught correctly, then it's a great injustice.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
A great injustice to different people because
very much so.
They never use Muslim when they never use Christian when they talk about imperialism and all the things that they did to the whole world, Yep. And the Catholic Church, they never talk about the Roman Catholic Church's role in slavery and how they became wealthy off of slavery.
Oh my goodness, no doubt.
Yes, but it's never discussed, it's never mentioned.
No doubt.
So I just want to bring up that point. So we have to be careful when we read into things.
Right.
Things personally, because we shouldn't, because the Christians have done so much damage in the name of Christianity to the people, until we can't.
And they still are.
The population can't even compare to what they've done.
No. And they still are. In
Exactly.
agreeing with you 100%. One of the most interesting article I read was this Caucasian author. He was atheist. I say that about him, but that's his choice. But what he talked about was the white supremacist foundations of evangelical Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so, you know, I remember being in college, you know, that one of my first ministers talked about and made the fact, he wasn't the first one to say it, that the most segregated day in America was Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you know, in terms of that, and just recently, I forgot where it was. It may have been in Virginia. I'm not sure. Where this church was established, and there was people were up in arms because in their charter and in establishing the church, they said it's for whites only. And someone said, you know, well, that's racist. And the minister, of course, said, you know, and the people that said no, we're just following the scripture as we interpret it, you know, and trying to keep everything pure as such. Okay. Even in this nonsense that happened on Wednesday, not nonsense in the sense that it was, but in the idea of things that happened. The one group called the Proud Boys and several others of these militia, the basis for them is evangelical Christianity with a white supremacist basis to it. Okay, and so you find that, you know, as Sister Sandra has said, but the Catholic Church, yes, their imposition of being involved, you know, in what takes place in the slave trade, you know, cannot be denied of the horrors that it condoned, you know, in that. And at the same time, we have to look at Protestants as well, because, you know, coming out of England, you know, there were Catholics, there were Jews that were involved in the slave trade, but by and large, Protestants, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, you know, with the firm belief that if you were of a darker hue, a darker color, you were definitely inferior. Okay, and so we have to, as Sister Sandra said, pay attention to this and note it and be, you know, and look at things that are being said about that circumstance, you know, because these are the things that took place, for sure. Okay, have 5 minutes left. Anyone else with any comments or questions or suggestions?
Is it anything that we would be good for us to read, or for next?
Next week, this was just the preliminary thing.
Okay.
Next week, in doing what I asked Sister Zakiya about, we'll look at the trade routes, and then I will begin to assign certain things for you to read and to look at.
Okay.
I'm sort of taking it easy on you now because I haven't said, well, we're having our first test, our first quiz like that yet, but it's coming. Okay. But in a good way, some, you know, things that will be due to be able to learn from, and that, you know, so, but I enjoy the camaraderie, the brotherhood, and the sisterhood of us being together as Muslims, and so I look forward every Sunday to being able to spend time with you. You know, I really feel good. I mean, a few or many, you know, I'm just glad that we're being able to do so.
Yes,
it helps us keep the identity as, you know, that we are a community. And that's really important, you know, more so than anything that I say, you know, because if it's correct, you know, alhamdulillah, Allah has blessed me to say what is correct. Like last week, I had to make an apology to Sister Andrea, and she told me there was no need to, but I did anyway, because I was wrong in my date concerning the fall of Granada, and it was in 1492, as she has said. Okay, so we go from, you know, if we go from there, we're all family, we're Muslims, loving each other for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I just look forward to this day, and I look forward to every Sunday that we can spend time together.
I mean,
alhamdulillah.
So if nothing else, you all have a blessed rest of the day and coming into the week. Imam Radi, I'll probably give you a call tomorrow so we can talk about we briefly discuss at the masjid on Friday.
Yeah, you know, I'm just we need to talk, because
okay,
I'm thinking that I want to promote this
Okay.
You know,